I never thought a simple trip to buy groceries would turn into the most humiliating experience of my adult life. There I was, reaching for my usual brand of pasta sauce, when the store manager appeared beside me like he'd been watching me the entire time. His expression was cold, suspicious, and when he asked me to step aside for a routine check, I knew something was terribly wrong. Before I tell you this incredible story, please hit like and subscribe. I'd love to know in the comments which city you're watching from. My name is Margaret Ward. I'm 54 years old, and I've been shopping at Patterson's Market for over 15 years. I know every cashier by name. I've watched their children grow up through their wallet photos, and I've never so much as forgotten to pay for a pack of gum. So, when Manager Peterson started explaining that they'd received multiple reports about my suspicious behavior, I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. The walk home felt like a blur of shame and confusion. How could anyone think I was shoplifting? I always use my debit card. I keep my receipts organized in my purse, and I even bring my own reusable bags with my name embroidered on them. But as I replayed the manager's words, one phrase kept echoing in my mind. We've had a concerned citizen reporting your activities for several weeks now. I barely made it through the front door before I was telling my husband everything. David Ward has been my rock for 28 years, and seeing his face transform from concern to anger as I described the encounter reminded me why I married him. He set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary and shook his head in disbelief. "Margaret, this is absolutely ridiculous," David said, his voice tight with frustration. "You're the most honest person I know. You once drove back to a restaurant because they undercharged us for dessert." He reached across our kitchen table and squeezed my hand. "Someone is deliberately trying to hurt you, and we need to find out who." That's when I remembered something that made my stomach drop. 3 weeks ago, I'd had that heated argument with my next-door neighbor, Patricia Knowles. We'd lived peacefully beside each other for 8 years, but lately, something had shifted. It started with small complaints about my garden sprinkler getting water on her driveway, then escalated when she accused my azalea bushes of growing too close to her property line. The final confrontation happened when she demanded I trim my oak tree because its leaves were falling in her yard. I'd stood my ground that day, politely but firmly explaining that the tree was well within my property boundaries and that fallen leaves were simply part of living in a neighborhood with mature landscaping. Patricia's face had turned an alarming shade of red, and she'd stormed off with a comment about neighbors who don't respect boundaries learning hard lessons. David's expression darkened as I shared this memory. "You think Patricia is behind this? That seems extreme, even for her." "I don't know what to think anymore," I admitted, sinking deeper into my chair. "But who else would know my shopping schedule well enough to make specific reports? She sees me loading groceries every Tuesday and Saturday like clockwork." The next morning, I was still wrestling with these suspicions when my daughter, Sarah Ward, stopped by for our usual Wednesday coffee. Sarah works as a paralegal downtown, and she has this wonderful ability to see situations from all angles while keeping her emotions in check. At 31, she's inherited David's logical mind and my stubborn streak, which makes her an excellent sounding board for family problems. "Mom, this is beyond petty neighborhood drama," Sarah said after I'd explained everything. Her dark eyes, so similar to mine, flashed with protective anger. "If Patricia is really making false reports about you, she could seriously damage your reputation in this community. Patterson's Market isn't just where you shop, it's where you volunteer for the annual food drive and where you've built relationships for years." Sarah was right, and that realization hit me harder than I'd expected. Our small town of Millbrook operates on relationships and word of mouth. If rumors started spreading about my character, it could affect everything from my volunteer work at the library to my part-time job at the local accounting firm during tax season. We need more information before we do anything, Sarah continued, pulling out her phone. Let me call my friend Rachel Morrison. She works part-time at Patterson's on weekends, and she might have heard something. Rachel Morrison has been Sarah's best friend since high school, and over the years, she's become like a second daughter to David and me. She's one of those genuinely kind people who remembers everyone's birthday and always offers to help during family gatherings. If anyone could discreetly find out what was really happening at the grocery store, it would be Rachel. 20 minutes later, Rachel was sitting in my living room with a cup of tea, looking uncomfortable and fidgety in a way I'd never seen before. She kept glancing between Sarah and me, clearly struggling with what she'd learned. Mrs. Ward, I really wish I didn't have to tell you this, Rachel began, her voice soft but steady. But someone has been calling the store regularly, claiming they've witnessed you concealing items and behaving suspiciously. The caller identified herself as a concerned neighbor and said she felt it was her civic duty to report potential theft. My heart sank even as my suspicions were confirmed. Did she give a name? Rachel nodded reluctantly. Patricia Knowles. She told Manager Peterson that she's lived next to you for years and has noticed changes in your behavior recently. She even provided specific dates and times, claiming she saw you acting nervous and secretive during your shopping trips. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. Even though I'd suspected Patricia, hearing the confirmation made it real in a way that took my breath away. This woman had shared holiday cookies with me, had asked me to water her plants during vacations, and had seemed genuinely friendly until recently. Now she was actively trying to destroy my reputation over a property line disagreement and some fallen leaves. David, who had been listening quietly from his chair by the window, finally spoke up. Rachel, did Manager Peterson seem to believe these accusations? That's the thing, Mr. Ward, Rachel said, looking even more uncomfortable. At first he was skeptical. He knows your family, and the accusations seemed out of character. But Patricia was very convincing. She provided detailed descriptions of Mrs. Ward's clothing on specific days, and even mentioned your shopping patterns and usual purchase amounts. It sounded like she'd been watching and taking notes. The thought of Patricia systematically observing my routine, documenting my activities to use against me, sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just petty revenge. It was calculated harassment designed to humiliate me in front of people whose opinions I valued. Sarah reached over and took my hand, her grip warm and reassuring. Mom, we're going to fix this. Patricia might think she's clever, but making false reports to damage someone's reputation is serious business. We just need to approach this carefully. As I sat there surrounded by my family and dear friend, I felt a mixture of gratitude and determination, replacing the shame and confusion I'd carried since yesterday's grocery store incident. Patricia Knowles might have started this fight over something as trivial as fallen leaves, but she'd picked the wrong person to target with her vindictive campaign. And that's when the pattern snapped into place. Rachel shifted in her chair, her expression growing even more troubled. There's something else, though. Something that didn't make sense to me when Patricia called the third time. Third time? David asked, his eyebrows raising. How many times has she contacted the store? 7 times in the past 2 weeks, Rachel admitted. But during that third call, she mentioned seeing you, Margaret, acting suspiciously near the pharmacy section on a Tuesday afternoon. She described you wearing a blue cardigan and said you kept looking around nervously while handling medication bottles. I frowned, trying to recall any recent Tuesday when I might have been in that section. I haven't bought anything from the pharmacy in months. My prescriptions come from the clinic downtown. Sarah leaned forward. What's so strange about that, Rachel? Well, I was working that Tuesday afternoon, and I remember it clearly because we had that big shipment mix-up. Margaret, you weren't even in the store that day. In fact, when Patricia called to report this supposed incident, you were probably at home because it was during the rainstorm that kept most people indoors. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Patricia hadn't just been watching me and reporting real visits with false accusations attached. She was completely fabricating encounters that never happened. "She's lying about everything," I said quietly, feeling a strange mix of relief and renewed anger. "If she's making up entire visits, then nothing she's told them can be trusted." David nodded grimly. "This moves it beyond petty neighbor disputes. She's engaged in a deliberate campaign to damage your reputation with detailed false reports." Rachel looked uncomfortable as she continued. "There's more. Yesterday, after you left so upset, I started thinking about all her calls. Some of the dates she mentioned, I cross-referenced with our schedule system. On at least 3 occasions, she reported seeing you on days when I know for certain you weren't there because I was specifically looking for you to tell you about sales on items you usually buy." Sarah stood up and began pacing, her frustration evident. "So, Patricia is sitting at home, probably watching the store parking lot, and then calling to report fake shopping trips? That's absolutely unhinged behavior, Mom. This goes way beyond being upset about property lines." "The pharmacy incident report bothers me the most," Rachel said. "She was so specific about the blue cardigan and your supposed nervous behavior. She even told Manager Peterson that she was concerned you might be planning to steal prescription medications to sell them. That's a serious accusation that could have involved law enforcement." I felt my stomach clench at the thought. A false report about prescription drug theft could have resulted in police involvement, not just store security watching me suspiciously. Patricia's escalating lies could have created legal problems that would have been difficult to resolve, even with proof of my innocence. "Rachel, did Manager Peterson seem to believe the pharmacy story?" David asked. "He was definitely taking it more seriously after that call. He even asked me to review security footage, which is when I started to realize something was wrong. We couldn't find any video of Margaret in the store on the day Patricia specified, which should have been our first clue that her reports weren't reliable." Sarah stopped pacing and turned to face us. "Mom, we need to document every false report Patricia has made. If Rachel can provide the dates Patricia claimed to see you, we can prove you weren't even there. That establishes a pattern of deliberate false reporting." I nodded, feeling more determined than overwhelmed for the first time since this situation began. "Rachel, would you be willing to help us gather that information? I know it puts you in an awkward position with your job." "Actually, it doesn't," Rachel replied, with a slight smile. "Manager Peterson asked me to investigate these reports more thoroughly because they weren't matching up with what our security system recorded. He's starting to suspect the caller might not be reliable, especially after we couldn't verify several of her claims." David looked thoughtful. "If the store manager is already questioning Patricia's credibility, that works in our favor. But we still need to address this directly with her before it escalates further." "I'm not sure confronting Patricia directly is wise," Sarah interjected. "Someone who's willing to fabricate detailed false reports about prescription drug theft isn't going to respond rationally to being called out on their behavior." Rachel glanced at her watch and stood up. "I should get back to work, but Margaret, I want you to know that most of the staff never believed these reports. We've known your family too long, and the accusations just didn't fit with who you are as a person." As Rachel gathered her purse, she paused at the door. "There's one more thing, though. This morning, before I came over here, Patricia called again. This time, she told Manager Peterson she had photographic evidence of your suspicious behavior and wanted to schedule a meeting to present it." The blood drained from my face. Patricia was preparing to escalate this situation even further, and whatever photographs she claimed to have would be just as fabricated as her previous reports. But what if her fake evidence looked convincing enough to cause serious trouble? Sarah's face hardened with protective anger. Photographic evidence? What could she possibly have photographed? You grocery shopping normally? That's exactly what worries me, I said, sinking deeper into my chair. Patricia could take a picture of me putting items in my purse, my cart, anywhere really, and then claim it shows me stealing. Without context, any normal shopping behavior could be twisted to look suspicious. David leaned forward, his lawyer instincts fully engaged now. This changes everything, Margaret. False reports are one thing, but if Patricia presents fabricated photographic evidence to the store, that could cross into harassment or even defamation territory. Rachel shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable with this new development. Manager Peterson seemed hesitant about meeting with her, especially after we couldn't verify her previous claims. But if she shows up with what looks like proof... She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. When is this supposed meeting happening? Sarah asked sharply. She wanted to schedule it for tomorrow afternoon, Rachel replied. Manager Peterson told her he'd call her back, but honestly, I think he's hoping the whole thing will just go away. I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. So, I have less than 24 hours before Patricia potentially convinces your manager that I'm a thief, based on doctored or misleading photos. Mom, we're not going to let that happen, Sarah said firmly, moving to sit on the arm of my chair. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt her old protective energy returning, the same fierce loyalty she'd shown as a child when other kids picked on her friends. David nodded in agreement. Rachel, would Manager Peterson be willing to hear our side before he meets with Patricia? If we can present our evidence of Margaret's innocence, along with proof that Patricia's previous reports were false, it might prevent him from taking her photographs seriously. I could ask him, Rachel said slowly. He's been questioning her credibility anyway, and honestly, after working with your family for years, I think he'd rather hear from you directly than deal with Patricia's drama. Sarah stood up abruptly, that familiar, determined set to her shoulders that I recognized from her teenage years when she'd decided to tackle a problem head-on. We need to be proactive here. Waiting around for Patricia's next move isn't working. What are you thinking? I asked, though part of me was afraid of the answer. Sarah had always been more confrontational than David or me when she felt her family was threatened. I'm thinking we need to understand exactly what Patricia thinks she has on you before she presents it to the store. If we know what we're dealing with, we can better defend against it. David looked troubled. Sarah, approaching Patricia directly could backfire. If she's unstable enough to fabricate evidence, confronting her might make her escalate even further. She's already escalating, Sarah shot back. She's gone from making phone calls to claiming she has photographic proof. What's next? Hiring a private investigator to follow Mom around. The thought made me shudder. I'd been so focused on clearing my name at the grocery store that I hadn't considered how far Patricia might be willing to take this vendetta. The idea that my own neighbor was potentially stalking me with a camera made me feel violated in a way I hadn't expected. Rachel glanced between us, clearly torn between wanting to help and staying professional. There's something else you should know. Patricia didn't just call about the meeting today. She also asked Manager Peterson about your shopping schedule, Margaret. She wanted to know what days and times you usually come in. The room fell silent. Sarah's face went pale, and I felt David tense beside me. She asked about Mom's schedule? Sarah's voice was dangerously quiet. That's not reporting suspected shoplifting anymore. That's stalking behavior, David finished grimly. Rachel, did your manager give her that information? No, absolutely not. Manager Peterson told her we don't share customer information for any reason. But the fact that she asked? Rachel shook her head. It made him uncomfortable, too. I realized my hands were shaking. This had gone so far beyond a simple misunderstanding or even neighborhood drama. Patricia was actively trying to monitor my movements, gather evidence against me, and potentially document my daily routine. The thought of her watching me, photographing me without my knowledge, made me feel sick. "Mom, you can't keep shopping there until this is resolved," Sarah said firmly. "If Patricia is trying to catch you on camera doing something she can twist into evidence, you're walking into a trap every time you go to the store." "But avoiding the store makes me look guilty," I protested. "And it's my neighborhood grocery store. I shouldn't have to change my entire routine because of Patricia's lies." David nodded thoughtfully. "Margaret's right about appearances. If she suddenly stops shopping at the store right before Patricia presents her evidence, it could be interpreted as consciousness of guilt." Rachel looked at her watch again, anxiety creeping into her expression. "I really do need to get back. But Margaret, promise me you'll be careful if you come in before we get this sorted out. Maybe shop with Sarah or David so you're not alone." The suggestion stung more than it should have. I was a grown woman who had been shopping independently for decades, and now I needed a chaperone to buy groceries in my own neighborhood because of my neighbor's campaign against me. But as Rachel headed toward the door, she turned back one more time with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Actually, there's one more thing Patricia said that didn't make sense at the time. She mentioned something about getting justice for all the customers who've been affected by your theft. She made it sound like you've been stealing from other stores too, not just ours." My stomach dropped. "Other stores? I haven't stolen from any stores." "I've never stolen anything in my life." Sarah's face flushed with anger. "She's trying to destroy Mom's reputation everywhere she shops. This isn't just about your grocery store anymore, Rachel." "I know," Rachel said quietly. "That's why I wanted to warn you. Patricia seems to think this is some kind of crusade she's on. Manager Peterson said she was very passionate about it, almost obsessive." After Rachel left, the three of us sat in heavy silence. The magnitude of what Patricia was doing began to sink in. This wasn't just about clearing my name at one store anymore. She was actively working to brand me as a serial shoplifter throughout the community. "What if she contacts other stores?" I asked, voicing the fear that was growing in my chest. "What if she calls the pharmacy where I get my medications, or the department store where I buy my clothes?" David leaned forward, his expression serious. "We need to think about this strategically. Patricia clearly has a plan, and we need to understand what she's trying to accomplish." "She's trying to ruin Mom's life," Sarah said bluntly. "That's what she's trying to accomplish." "But why?" I asked for what felt like the 100th time. I keep coming back to that question. Why would Patricia go to these lengths? We barely interact. I wave when I see her. I keep my yard neat. I don't play loud music or have parties. What could I have possibly done to deserve this? David stood and walked to the window, looking out toward Patricia's house. Sometimes people don't need a rational reason. Sometimes they're just looking for a target, and you happen to be convenient. That's a terrifying thought, I said. The idea that I could be destroyed by someone's whim, that my reputation and peace of mind were at the mercy of a neighbor's inexplicable vendetta, made me feel powerless. Sarah moved to sit closer to me on the couch. Mom, we're going to figure this out, but David's right about being strategic. We need to know what evidence Patricia thinks she has before she presents it to the store. How do we find that out without confronting her directly? I asked. Maybe we don't have a choice, David said, still looking out the window. Maybe it's time for a direct conversation. Absolutely not, Sarah said immediately. If Patricia is as unstable as she seems, confronting her could make things worse. She could escalate or claim we're harassing her. I felt trapped between two impossible choices. Stay passive and let Patricia continue building her case against me, or take action that might backfire spectacularly. "There's something else bothering me," I said slowly. "Rachel mentioned that Patricia has been asking about my shopping schedule. How would she even know I shop there regularly? How long has she been watching me?" The question hung in the air, and I saw David and Sarah exchange a worried glance. The realization that Patricia might have been observing my daily routine for weeks or months without my knowledge was deeply unsettling. "Mom," Sarah said carefully, "when you leave for errands, do you always go the same route? Same times of day?" I thought about it. I suppose I do have routines. I usually go to the grocery store on Tuesday mornings and Friday afternoons. I like to avoid the crowds. The innocuous habits that had given structure to my week now felt like vulnerabilities that Patricia had somehow weaponized against me. David turned back from the window, his face grim. "We need to assume she's been documenting everything. Your schedule, your activities, probably taking photos. The question is, what is she planning to do with all that information?" As if summoned by our conversation, I saw Patricia emerge from her house and walk deliberately toward her mailbox, glancing toward my house as she did so. Even from this distance, something about her posture seemed different, more confident, more purposeful. "She's up to something," I whispered, and both David and Sarah moved to see what I was looking at. Patricia lingered at her mailbox longer than necessary, and then, to our shock, she pulled out her phone and appeared to be taking pictures of my house. "Oh my God, she's taking pictures of the house!" Sarah breathed, moving closer to the window but staying out of sight. David's jaw tightened. "That's it! This has gone too far!" Wait, I said, grabbing his arm as he started toward the door. "Let her finish. We need to see what she's doing." Patricia held up her phone, clearly taking multiple shots of my front yard, my car in the driveway, and what appeared to be close-ups of my house numbers. She wasn't even trying to be discreet about it. "This is insane," Sarah muttered. "What could she possibly need photos of your house for?" "Evidence," David said grimly. "She's building some kind of case. The shopping schedule, the accusations at the store, now photos of where you live. This isn't random harassment, Mom. This is systematic." Patricia finished her photo session and walked back toward her house, but not before turning back one more time to look directly at my living room window. The way she stared made my skin crawl, as if she knew we were watching and wanted us to know she didn't care. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked right at us. "She's trying to intimidate you," Sarah said, anger creeping into her voice. "This is psychological warfare." I sank back onto the couch, feeling overwhelmed. "But why? What did I ever do to her? I've been nothing but polite the few times we've interacted. I helped her carry groceries once when she was struggling with her bags. I even invited her to my book club when she first moved in." "Wait, back up," David said, suddenly alert. "You invited her to your book club? When was this? What happened?" I tried to remember the details. "It was maybe 6 months ago, right after she moved in. I was being neighborly. She seemed interested when I mentioned it, said she loved to read." "And?" Sarah prompted. "She showed up to one meeting. It was awkward. She disagreed with everything everyone said about the book we were discussing. Not just different opinions, but she was almost aggressive about it. She accused Martha of not understanding the author's intent, told Joan her interpretation was simplistic. By the end of the evening, everyone was uncomfortable. David was nodding slowly. "What happened after that meeting?" "Well, I didn't uninvite her, but I stopped mentioning when we were meeting. I felt bad about it, but the other women had said they didn't want her back." Martha even said Patricia made her feel stupid for sharing her thoughts about the book. So she was effectively excluded from the group? Sarah said, putting the pieces together. I suppose so, yes. But I didn't think she cared. She never asked about future meetings, never brought it up again. I paused, remembering. Although, now that I think about it, there were a few times after that when I was leaving for book club and I noticed her watching from her window. Mom, this might be where all of this started, David said, sitting down across from me. You said this was 6 months ago? When did the grocery store incidents begin? I thought back, trying to establish a timeline. Rachel first mentioned it to me about 3 months ago, but she said the complaints had been going on for a while before that. So, roughly 3 months after the book club situation, Sarah calculated. That can't be a coincidence. The realization hit me like a cold wave. You think she's doing all of this because she felt rejected by my book club? I think Patricia is someone who doesn't handle social rejection well, David said carefully. And instead of processing those feelings in a healthy way, she's decided to retaliate. But that's so disproportionate, I protested. Feeling left out of a book club doesn't justify trying to ruin someone's reputation. It doesn't have to make sense to us, Sarah said. It only has to make sense to her. I felt a chill as I considered this possibility. If Patricia's campaign against me really was rooted in that book club incident, then this wasn't going to just fade away on its own. She had a specific grievance, justified or not, and she was methodically working to make me pay for it. If you're right about this, I said slowly, then what is she planning to do with those photos she just took? Before anyone could answer, we heard the distinct sound of a car door slamming in Patricia's driveway. Through the window, we watched as Patricia emerged from her car, carrying what looked like a manila envelope and a small stack of papers. She had been somewhere, conducting business, and now she was back with what appeared to be official documents. Where do you think she went? Sarah asked, voicing what we were all thinking. David's expression was troubled. I don't know, but whatever it is, I don't think we're going to like it. As we watched Patricia disappear into her house with the envelope, an uncomfortable silence settled over us. I found myself straining to see if there were any other clues about where she had been, but her car gave nothing away. Mom, you're going to wear a hole in the carpet, David said, watching me pace back and forth in front of the window. I can't help it. The not knowing is driving me crazy. I stopped and turned to face them. What if she went to the police? What if those photos she took somehow look incriminating? Sarah reached over and gently guided me to sit back down. Let's think about this logically. Even if she did go to the police, what would she actually have? Photos of you putting groceries in your car? That's not evidence of anything. But what if she's been building some kind of case? I asked, my voice rising slightly. What if this goes beyond just complaining to Rachel at the store? David leaned forward, his expression serious but calm. Then we deal with it. But right now, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We don't actually know what was in that envelope or where she went. I knew he was right, but the anxiety was eating at me. 3 months of this situation had worn down my usual ability to stay rational. I just keep thinking about how calculated this all seems. The timing with the book club, the way she's been watching me, and now whatever this is. The book club connection does make this feel more personal, Sarah admitted, but that might actually work in our favor. How do you figure that? I asked. Because if her motivation is personal rather than based on any real wrongdoing, then eventually that's going to become obvious to anyone she talks to. People can usually tell when someone has an axe to grind. David nodded. Sarah's right. The more Patricia pushes this, the more likely it is that her real motives will show through. I wanted to believe them, but doubt nagged at me. What if Rachel at the store already believes her version of events? What if other people do too? Has Rachel treated you differently when you shop? Sarah asked. I thought about my recent interactions at the grocery store. Not really. She's always been friendly. Maybe a little awkward when she mentioned the complaints, but not suspicious or cold. That tells us something important, David said. If Rachel really believed you were shoplifting, she would have handled it very differently. The fact that she came to you directly suggests she was confused by the accusations, not convinced by them. A new worry occurred to me. But what about other people in the neighborhood? Patricia talks to several of our neighbors regularly. What if she's spreading this story around? Have any of your other neighbors treated you differently? Sarah asked. I considered this carefully. Actually, no. Mrs. Henderson from across the street was just as chatty as ever when I saw her yesterday, and Tom from next door helped me carry in my packages last week without seeming the least bit suspicious. So it sounds like either Patricia isn't talking to the neighbors about this, or they're not taking her seriously if she is, David observed. This realization provided some relief, but it was short-lived. Through the window, I noticed Patricia's front door opening again. She stepped out onto her porch and looked directly toward our house, making no attempt to hide the fact that she was watching us. She knows we're in here talking about her, I said, involuntarily stepping back from the window. Sarah glanced over and saw Patricia's bold stare. Let her look. We're not doing anything wrong by having a family conversation in your own home. But Patricia's behavior was unsettling in a new way. Instead of the furtive watching I had grown accustomed to, this felt like a challenge. She stood on her porch for several long minutes, her gaze fixed on our house, before finally going back inside. That was different, David said quietly. What do you mean? I asked, though I had felt it too. She's usually been more subtle about the watching. This felt almost like she wanted us to see her. Sarah frowned. Like she's trying to intimidate you. The thought sent a chill through me. But why now? What's changed? Maybe whatever she did today gave her more confidence, David suggested. Or maybe she's escalating because she feels like her previous efforts haven't been working. I sank back into my chair, feeling overwhelmed. I don't know how much more of this I can take. It's affecting everything. I'm second-guessing every trip to the store, every time I go outside. I feel like I'm under constant surveillance. That's probably exactly how she wants you to feel, Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. But we can't let her win by making you a prisoner in your own home. Sarah's right, David agreed. This situation isn't going to resolve itself, and it's clearly getting worse. We need to take some kind of action. But what can we do? I asked. We still don't have any real proof of what she's been doing, and I can't exactly confront her based on suspicions and overheard phone conversations. Before anyone could answer, we heard the distinct sound of Patricia's front door opening and closing again. This time, when we looked out, we saw her walking purposefully toward our house, that manila envelope clutched in her hand. Oh my God, she's coming over here, I whispered, my heart racing as I watched Patricia march across her lawn toward our front door. David immediately stood up. Okay, this is it. We're about to find out what's been going on. I don't want to answer the door, I said, backing away from the window. What if she starts accusing me of things in front of you two? What if she has some kind of evidence in that envelope that makes me look guilty? Sarah moved closer to me. Hey, breathe. Whatever she has to say, we're here with you. You're not facing this alone. The sharp knock on the front door made me jump, even though we had been expecting it. Patricia knocked again, almost immediately, more insistently this time. Should we just ignore her? I asked hopefully. She knows we're home, David pointed out. She was literally just staring at us through the window. If we don't answer, it might make things worse. David's right, Sarah agreed. Besides, maybe this is actually good. Maybe she'll finally say something that gives us a clearer picture of what's going on. Another series of knocks, this time accompanied by Patricia's voice. I know you're in there. We need to talk. I looked at David and Sarah, feeling trapped. Will you both stay with me when I answer it? I don't want to be alone with her. Of course, David said firmly. We're not going anywhere. Sarah nodded. We'll be right there beside you. I walked slowly to the front door, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for the handle. Taking a deep breath, I opened it to find Patricia standing on my porch, that manila envelope pressed against her chest like armor. Patricia, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What can I do for you? She looked past me at David and Sarah, who had positioned themselves just behind me in the entryway. I see you have witnesses, she said, her tone cold and calculated. They're my family, I replied, confused by her phrasing. Is there something you needed? Patricia's eyes narrowed. I think you know exactly why I'm here. I think you know what you've been doing, and I think you know that I know. David stepped forward slightly. Patricia, I'm not sure what you're implying, but maybe you could be more specific about what this is regarding. Don't play dumb with me, Patricia snapped, her composure cracking. I've been watching. I've been documenting everything. The expensive groceries, the designer items, the way she always seems to have money for things when she claims to be struggling. My mouth fell open. What are you talking about? I've never claimed to be struggling, and I work for everything I buy. Oh, please, Patricia scoffed. I've seen you coming home with bags and bags of groceries multiple times a week. Organic produce, expensive cuts of meat, imported cheeses. Do you think I'm stupid? Sarah spoke up, her voice incredulous. Are you seriously questioning someone's right to buy groceries? What business is it of yours what she purchases? Patricia turned her attention to Sarah, her face flushing with anger. It becomes my business when those purchases are being stolen. When someone in my neighborhood is making the rest of us look bad by association. That's a serious accusation, David said, his voice taking on a protective edge. Do you have any actual evidence to support that claim? Patricia clutched the envelope tighter. I have plenty of evidence. I've been keeping detailed records of her shopping patterns, the time she goes to the store, the items she brings home. I've been tracking everything. I felt a chill run down my spine. You've been tracking my shopping? Patricia, that's stalking behavior. It's neighborhood watch, she shot back. It's being a responsible citizen who cares about the reputation of this community. No, I said, finding my voice and some courage I didn't know I had. That's harassment. You've been spying on me, making lists of my personal activities, and apparently spreading rumors about me to local businesses. Patricia's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to know about that last part. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do, I pressed, feeling David and Sarah's supportive presence behind me. You've been telling people at the grocery store that I'm shoplifting, haven't you? For a moment, Patricia looked genuinely caught off guard. Then her expression hardened again. If I've shared my concerns with certain parties, It's only because I believe in community accountability." "Your concerns?" Sarah interjected, her voice rising with indignation. "Your completely unfounded, invasive, and frankly disturbing concerns about a neighbor who's done absolutely nothing wrong?" "How do you know she's done nothing wrong?" Patricia demanded. "Have you seen her receipts? Have you verified that everything she brings home was actually paid for?" David stepped fully beside me now, his presence reassuring and strong. "Patricia, I think you need to understand something. What you're describing isn't normal neighbor behavior. It's harassment, and it's potentially illegal." "Illegal?" Patricia laughed bitterly. "The only illegal activity here is the theft that I've been trying to expose." "Then show us," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "Show us this evidence you claim to have. Open that envelope and let's see these detailed records you've been keeping." Patricia hesitated, her grip on the envelope shifting. "I don't have to prove anything to you. I've already shared my documentation with the appropriate people." "What appropriate people?" David asked sharply. "Who exactly have you been talking to about these fabricated concerns?" "They're not fabricated," Patricia insisted, but I could hear something wavering in her voice now. "I know what I've seen." "You've seen me grocery shopping," I said firmly. "You've seen me living my life, buying food and household items like every other person in this neighborhood. There is nothing suspicious or illegal about that." Patricia stared at me for a long moment, and I could see something shifting in her expression. The certainty that had been there moments before seemed to be cracking. "I've been watching you for months," she said quietly, almost as if she were talking to herself. "Taking notes, keeping track, making sure I didn't miss anything important." "That's exactly the problem," Sarah said gently but firmly. "That level of surveillance isn't normal or healthy, Patricia. It's obsessive." Patricia blinked, looking suddenly disoriented. "But someone has to pay attention. Someone has to make sure things are done properly." I felt an unexpected surge of something that might have been sympathy. "Patricia, when was the last time you talked to someone about how you've been feeling? A friend? Or a family member? Or maybe a counselor?" Her face immediately closed off again. "There's nothing wrong with me. The problem is people like you who think rules don't apply to them." "What rules?" David asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. "What specific rule has she broken?" But before Patricia could answer, she took a step backward, still clutching the envelope. "This isn't over. I have evidence, and people need to know the truth about what kind of person is living in their neighborhood." As she turned to leave, I called after her. "Patricia, whatever you think you have in that envelope, whatever you've told people about me, this needs to stop. Today." She paused, but didn't turn around. "Or what?" "Or I'll be forced to take this to the next level," I said, finding strength I didn't know I possessed. "This harassment stops now, Patricia, or I'll be documenting your behavior just as thoroughly as you claim to have been documenting mine." Patricia finally turned around, her eyes flashing. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm protecting myself," I replied steadily. "The same way you claim you've been protecting the neighborhood." David stepped slightly forward, his voice calm but firm. "Patricia, I think we all need to take a step back here. This situation has gotten completely out of hand." "You don't understand," Patricia said, her voice rising. "I've spent hours organizing my observations. I have timestamps. I have behavioral patterns documented." "I've been thorough." Sarah exchanged a concerned glance with me. "Patricia, what you're describing sounds exhausting. How much time are you spending watching other people's daily activities?" "As much time as it takes," Patricia snapped. Someone has to maintain standards around here. But whose standards? I asked. Who appointed you to monitor everyone else's behavior? Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times before she answered. No one had to appoint me. I can see what needs to be done. What you think needs to be done, David corrected gently. But Patricia, your perceptions might not match reality. Have you considered that possibility? My perceptions are fine, she said, but I noticed her voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. I know what I've observed. Tell us exactly what you think you've observed, Sarah said, sitting down on her front step, as if settling in for a longer conversation. Walk us through one specific incident. Patricia looked uncertain for the first time since this confrontation began. Well, there was last Tuesday when she came home with more bags than usual. More bags than usual, according to what? I asked. Do you keep account of how many grocery bags I typically carry? I notice things, Patricia said defensively. And that day, you had 6 bags, but you were only gone for 45 minutes. David stared at her. Patricia, you're timing her grocery trips? I'm being observant, she insisted, but she was backing up toward her own house again. There's nothing wrong with paying attention to unusual patterns. But Patricia, Sarah said softly, what you're describing isn't casual observation. You're conducting surveillance on your neighbor's daily life. That's not normal neighborly awareness. Patricia clutched the envelope tighter against her chest. Nothing about this neighborhood is normal anymore. People come and go at all hours. They don't maintain their properties properly. They don't follow basic courtesy rules. What courtesy rules have I broken? I asked, genuinely curious now. You don't wave when you see me watching from my window, Patricia said, and the statement was so absurd that all 3 of us fell silent for a moment. Patricia, David said carefully. Most people don't wave at windows unless they're sure someone is intentionally greeting them. If you're just observing from inside your house, she probably doesn't even know you're there. She knows, Patricia said with certainty. She deliberately avoids making eye contact. I felt a chill of recognition. Patricia, I avoid making eye contact because I felt like I was being watched constantly. It made me uncomfortable, so I started looking down when I walked to my car. See? Patricia pointed at me triumphantly. Guilty behavior. Honest people don't avoid eye contact. Uncomfortable people avoid eye contact, Sarah said firmly. People who feel like their privacy is being invaded avoid eye contact. That's a completely normal response to feeling surveilled. Patricia stared at Sarah for a long moment, and I could see her processing this information in a way that clearly hadn't occurred to her before. But if she's not doing anything wrong, Patricia said slowly, then why would she feel uncomfortable? Because being watched constantly is uncomfortable regardless of what you're doing, David explained. How would you feel if you discovered that one of your neighbors had been timing your daily activities and keeping detailed notes about your behavior? That's different, Patricia said quickly. I'm not doing anything suspicious. Neither am I said quietly. But you've decided that my normal activities are suspicious, and you've been treating me like a criminal based on that decision. Patricia looked down at the envelope in her hands, and for the first time, she seemed to really see it. Her grip loosened slightly. I just wanted to make sure everything was proper, she said, and her voice sounded smaller now, less certain. I understand that impulse, Sarah said gently. But Patricia, the way you've been going about it has crossed some serious boundaries. And more importantly, it's caused real harm to an innocent person. Patricia looked up at me, and I saw something in her expression that might have been the beginning of doubt. "What if I'm wrong?" she asked quietly, almost to herself. "Then we figure out how to make this right," David said. "But that starts with you acknowledging that your approach has been harmful." Patricia stood there for several long seconds, staring at the envelope. Then, slowly, she looked back up at me. "What if I can't stop?" she asked, and the vulnerability in her voice caught me completely off guard. Patricia's question hung in the air like a confession. The vulnerability in her voice was so unexpected that I found myself stepping closer instead of backing away. "What do you mean, you can't stop?" Sarah asked gently. Patricia clutched the envelope tighter, her knuckles white. "I mean, what if I see you walking to your car tomorrow and I automatically start timing it again? What if I can't help but notice when you leave and when you come back? What if I've been doing this so long that I don't know how to just not pay attention?" David and Sarah exchanged a glance, and I could see them both realizing what I was beginning to understand. This wasn't just about me being falsely accused of shoplifting. This was about Patricia having developed a compulsive behavior that she might not even fully control. "How long have you been keeping track of my activities?" I asked carefully. "Since you moved in," Patricia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "At first it was just casual noticing, you know? New neighbor, different routine than the previous tenants. But then I started writing things down because I thought I should be aware of what was happening in the neighborhood." "That was over 2 years ago," I said, the reality of it sinking in. "I know." Patricia looked ashamed. "And somewhere along the way, it became this thing I had to do. I had to check when you left, had to note when you came back. If I didn't write it down, I felt anxious all day." Sarah sat down on my front steps, gesturing for Patricia to join her. "Patricia, that sounds exhausting." "It is," Patricia said, surprising me by actually sitting down. "But I told myself it was important. I told myself I was being a good neighbor, keeping the community safe." "But it wasn't making you feel safe, was it?" David asked, settling on the other side of Patricia. "If you felt compelled to do it, it was probably making you more anxious, not less." Patricia nodded slowly. "I couldn't relax until I'd recorded everything, and when your patterns changed even slightly, I'd worry about it for hours. When you started going to the grocery store more frequently, I convinced myself something criminal must be happening, because why else would someone's routine change?" "People's routines change for hundreds of normal reasons," I said, still standing but feeling less defensive now. "I started shopping more often because I was trying to eat fresher food and avoid waste." "That makes sense," Patricia said quietly. "But in my head, any deviation from your normal pattern meant something was wrong. And once I decided something was wrong, I couldn't let it go." "So you called the grocery store," Sarah said. "Multiple times," Patricia admitted. "The first time, I just asked if they'd had any issues with shoplifting recently. When they said yes, I felt validated. The second time, I mentioned that I was concerned about a neighbor. By the third call, I was specifically describing you and asking them to watch for you." The progression of it made my stomach turn. "How many times did you call them?" Patricia looked down at her hands. 6 times over the past month. Each time you went shopping and came back quickly, I called to report it." "6 times?" I repeated, understanding now why Marcus had seemed so certain about my guilt. "Patricia, you essentially conducted a campaign to convince them I was a thief." "I didn't think of it that way," she said, but her voice cracked. "I thought I was reporting legitimate suspicious activity." "But you never once considered just talking to me directly?" David asked. I was afraid, Patricia said. What if you were actually stealing and confronting you made you angry? What if you retaliated somehow? So instead you tried to have me arrested, I said. Patricia flinched. I didn't think they would actually arrest you. I thought they would just watch you more carefully, and if nothing was happening, they'd realize I was wrong. But something was happening, Sarah pointed out. You kept calling them. From their perspective, a concerned neighbor was repeatedly reporting suspicious behavior. They had no reason to doubt you. I see that now, Patricia said. I see how it escalated beyond what I intended. I found myself sitting down on the steps too, forming an odd circle with these three people who an hour ago had been strangers to Patricia. The thing is, Patricia, even if your intentions weren't malicious, the impact was devastating. I was humiliated, accused of a crime I didn't commit, and banned from a store I've shopped at for years. I know, Patricia said, tears starting to form in her eyes. And I don't know how to fix it. Well, calling them back would be a start, David said, explaining that you made a mistake. But what if they don't believe me? Patricia asked. What if they think I'm only recanting because I got caught? You did only recant because you got caught, Sarah said, not unkindly. But that doesn't mean your recantation isn't genuine. Sometimes getting caught is what forces us to see our mistakes clearly. Patricia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What if I call them and it doesn't help? What if they've already made up their minds about you? Then at least you'll have tried to correct your mistake, I said. But Patricia, I need you to understand something. Even if you call them, even if they believe you and lift the ban, the damage to our relationship as neighbors is significant. I know, she whispered. I don't know if I'll ever feel comfortable living next door to someone who spent 2 years documenting my every move, I continued. And I definitely don't know how to trust someone who, instead of talking to me about their concerns, went directly to trying to get me in trouble with the law. Patricia nodded miserably. I understand if you hate me. I don't hate you, I said, and I was surprised to realize it was true. But I'm hurt, and I'm angry, and I'm concerned about your behavior continuing. That's what scares me most, Patricia said. What if I promise to stop watching you, but then I can't actually stop? What if it's become such a habit that I do it without thinking? Sarah leaned forward. Patricia, have you considered that you might benefit from talking to someone about this? A counselor or therapist? You think I'm crazy, Patricia said defensively. I think you're struggling with compulsive behavior that's causing problems for you and others, Sarah said calmly. That's not crazy, that's human, but it is something that professional help might address more effectively than willpower alone. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at me directly for what felt like the first time since this conversation began. If I call the grocery store tomorrow and explain that I made a mistake, will you consider giving me a chance to prove I can change? I felt the weight of her question. David and Sarah were both looking at me expectantly, and I realized that my answer would determine not just the immediate resolution of this situation, but the entire future dynamic of my neighborhood. But just as I opened my mouth to respond, Patricia's phone buzzed loudly in her pocket. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and her face went completely pale. Oh no, she whispered, staring at the phone. Oh no, oh no, oh no. What is it? David asked. Patricia looked up at us with panic in her eyes. It's Marcus from the grocery store. He's asking if I can come in tomorrow to give a formal statement about what I witnessed. The silence that followed Patricia's words felt thick and suffocating in my small living room. The afternoon light filtering through my curtains seemed to dim as the gravity of the situation settled over all of us. Patricia's hands trembled as she held the phone, staring at the message like it might change if she looked at it long enough. A formal statement, I repeated slowly, feeling my stomach drop. That means they're treating this as a real investigation now. David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from our childhood whenever he was trying to process something overwhelming. Patricia, this changes everything. If you go in there tomorrow and tell them you made it all up, they're going to want to know why you reported it in the first place. There could be consequences for filing a false report. I didn't file a report, Patricia said quickly, her voice rising with panic. I just mentioned it to Marcus one day when I was checking out. I thought I was being helpful, being a good citizen. I never meant for it to become official. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful but troubled. But that's exactly how these things escalate, Patricia. One casual comment becomes 2, then 3, then suddenly the store management feels they have enough witness testimony to take action. The weight of Patricia's surveillance over the past 2 years pressed down on me like a physical force. I imagined her watching me carry my groceries from my car, timing my trips, noting which bags looked fuller than others. The thought made my skin crawl. But more than that, it made me deeply sad. How lonely and suspicious must her life have become for this to seem like reasonable behavior? What exactly did you tell Marcus? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear building in my chest. Patricia's face crumpled. I told him I'd seen you coming home with more groceries than you'd paid for. I said I'd noticed it multiple times over several months. I mentioned that you always seemed nervous when you came back from shopping. I seemed nervous because I could feel you watching me, I said, the frustration finally breaking through my attempt at calm. I knew someone was staring at me from your window, but I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. You weren't paranoid, Patricia whispered. I was watching. Every time. David stood up abruptly and walked to my front window, looking out toward Patricia's house. His jaw was clenched in a way that told me he was fighting to control his temper. Patricia, do you understand what you've done here? You've potentially destroyed someone's reputation based on absolutely nothing. And now that the store wants an official statement, lying to them could get you in legal trouble too. I know, Patricia said, her voice breaking. I know I've ruined everything. But what am I supposed to do now? If I go in there and tell them I made it all up, they'll want to know why. And if I don't go in, they'll think I'm avoiding them, which will make it look even more suspicious for her. Sarah moved to the edge of her seat, her voice taking on the practical tone she used when she was problem-solving. Let's think through this step by step. Patricia, when you spoke to Marcus before, was it just casual conversation, or did he write anything down? It felt casual, Patricia said, wiping her nose with a tissue. But looking back, I think he might have been taking it more seriously than I realized. He asked specific questions about dates and times, and I tried to answer them as best I could. My heart sank further. Specific questions about dates and times meant Marcus had likely been building a case, documenting Patricia's claims in preparation for exactly this moment. The professional thoroughness of requesting a formal statement suggested the store was preparing to involve law enforcement, or at least create a permanent record that would follow me. Patricia, I said, feeling the full weight of what I was about to ask. I need you to be completely honest with me. When you talked to Marcus, did you exaggerate what you thought you saw? Did you make things sound more definitive than they actually were? Patricia's silence stretched so long that I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, Her voice was barely audible. Yes, I wanted him to take me seriously, so I made it sound like I was absolutely certain about what I'd witnessed. I told him I'd seen you concealing items and that you always looked around to make sure no one was watching. The room felt like it was spinning. Not only had Patricia been surveilling me based on nothing, but she'd also embellished her observations to make them sound like concrete evidence of criminal behavior. The casual neighborly complaint had become a detailed accusation of theft. David turned back from the window, his face flushed with anger. Patricia, you do realize that what you've described could be considered harassment, right? 2 years of surveillance, followed by making false statements to get someone banned from a business? There are laws about this kind of thing. I never meant for any of this to happen, Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. I just got so caught up in watching, and then when I started talking to Marcus, it felt good to have someone listen to me. I felt important, like I was helping protect the store. The psychology of what Patricia was describing made a terrible kind of sense. Isolated, possibly lonely, she'd found purpose in her surveillance and validation in being treated as a reliable witness. What had started as casual observation had spiraled into an obsession that gave her life structure and meaning, even as it destroyed mine. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. The question now is, how do we fix this without making things worse for everyone involved? Can it be fixed? I asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since Patricia showed us that text message. If she goes in tomorrow and admits she made it all up, won't that just create a whole new set of problems? The 4 of us sat in my living room as the afternoon shadows lengthened, each lost in our own thoughts about the impossible situation Patricia's behavior had created. Outside, I could hear the normal sounds of suburban life continuing around us. A lawnmower in the distance, children playing somewhere down the street. The everyday rhythms of a neighborhood where people trusted each other and minded their own business. Those simple sounds of normalcy felt like they belonged to a different world now. One where I could go grocery shopping without being watched, where my neighbors didn't spend years documenting my movements, where a casual trip to buy food couldn't turn into an accusation of theft. Patricia's phone buzzed again in her hand, and we all tensed, but she quickly silenced it without looking at the message. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. I'm scared of what happens when I have to face what I've done.